So, today is the 14th of May 2022, and on this day, 40 years ago, this album was released. Combat Rock by The Clash. I bought it that year. You can see the price, and it was £5.79. And it is one of the best albums I've been listening to over those 40 years. I remember that summer in 1984, I was listening to this all the time. Right at the moment, we've got Know Your Rights, which I always play in my political science class on the politics of developing nations. It's a really political album, and it is jam-packed with amazing songs, including one that featured Allen Ginsberg, a beat poet, reading through there, and it's just with Ghetto Defendant, also another really political song. There's not really a bad song on there if you don't count the start of side B, which has Overpowered by Funk, which I loathed then, and 40 years later, I still do. Anyway, this is such a momentous sort of mark that that's been made on popular music, on rock and roll. As my friend Stairsy said, The Clash, they're just rock and roll. Also described as the only band that ever matters. I mean, there's not enough superlatives to talk about The Clash as a band, and I really like this album as well. So therefore I thought I want to make a rock and roll drink to commemorate that. And the name lent itself easily to an old style cocktail called a Rockin Rye. And the reason there's a Rockin Rye was there used to be, back in the old days, I mean, we're talking in the 19th century, you'd get a glass of some rot gut rye whiskey, which is the most popular alcohol of the time, and it was so rotten that there'd be some rock candy on the side of it, some hard candies, some sort of crystallized sugar essentially and flavored, that would ease its way down. And after a while, a drink came out of that called a Rockin Rye, which essentially was billed as medicinal, much in the way Coca-Cola was advertised as medicinal when it used to have coca in it back in the good old days. This was similar, and it was made with a bunch of different ingredients, spices, especially one called horehound. And I thought, I should really make something from that. You can buy a sort of pre-made cocktail of Rockin Rye, but this idea of pre-made cocktails, do me a favor, stop trying to do skilled bartenders out of a job. These things can be made. And so I had to figure out how to make a kind of an equivalent. I mean, this is completely my riff on all of this, and which is why I'm not calling it a Rockin Rye, I'm calling it a Rockin Rye, which sounds like rock and rye, but it's got the idea that something's rocking and rolling, I guess. I don't know, that's what I'm calling it, as a rockin' rye. And I got some of these hard candies, or boiled sweets as we call them in England, and it's made with horehound, that very noticeably, here's what one looks like, if you can see that there. Very odd sort of taste, a sort of root beery, licoricey, sort of medicinal taste, I suppose. And so what I did was I smashed a bunch of them up with a rubber mallet, and I mixed them with water on the stove in a pan, and I also put in a couple of other herbs as well to go there, because that becomes like a simple syrup then, 50-50 with that sugar from those, plus the water, plus I put in some cinnamon stick and some cloves, and the result is a super fragrant, again, slightly medicinal syrup, which we're going to use in this. The other thing that a Rockin Rye typically has is some citrus, and instead of just typically putting some orange juice, which I've seen elsewhere in there, I'm doing that slightly different with an orange liqueur in there anyway. So, all right, that's enough talking. We're on to car jamming now. We sees Laurent Bacall in the car jam, and I just want to make this instead. So let's go ahead. It is, of course, a rye drink, and it specifically calls for the 100 proof if you can get it. Don't worry if you can't. Just use something else, like a 90 proof or a 80 proof. It doesn't really matter that much. You'll get the spiciness from the rye, and that's important. I open it up. It's very fragrant spirit rye whiskey, and I do like it. And this 100 proof, though, it can knock your socks off a little bit. I'm not going to lie about that. This is Old Forester, which is one of my favorites of that strength. Next, we're going to take some of that syrup that I made from the Claey's Candy horehound lozenges, I suppose. Now, don't put too much of this in. This is also very fragrant stuff, especially with the cloves in it as well, and the cinnamon. Really sort of spicy, and it's like a winter spicy sort of thing. And it turns out you could probably make this drink warm, and it would be a fairly decent fairly decent kind of, you know, a winter when you drink when you've got a cold, much like a hot toddy does, I think. And you could serve that at room temperature, I reckon. Anyway, next thing I'm putting in is some cherry liqueur. I did see someone else, it was on Simon Difford's site, where he put in some of the syrup from the maraschino cherries. And that would work in a pinch, I'm fairly sure, but this just makes this a little more boozy, I suppose. Oh, how terrible. Anyway, we want another 1/4 ounce of that, in like so. And then the next part, the citrus part of this is orange liqueur, and I'm using Cointreau because that's what I've got in. Any kind of triple sec type drink would work very well. We're going to up this slightly, and I'm going to put in a 1/2 ounce of that. But there's more. And I decided that it was missing one more thing. I'd seen some other recipes that include some wormwood in there as well. So what I'm going to do is put a little tiny bit of absinte in, absinte verde, the green stuff. And you really don't want to put too much of this in. A very little goes a very, very long way, which is why this bottle just lasts for years and years. And I am putting in 1/2 of a barspoon. In fact, a little bit less than that would not be the end of the world, because you just want the sensation of it. And that also gives you that sort of feeling of something medicinal with the wormwood, along with the horehound, along with the cinnamon, along with the cloves. I mean, seriously, this is a healthy drink, and that's how it was sold for many years. The benefits of Rockin Rye for your health. And I'm fairly sure that if I was not feeling top of the world, this might help me feel a little bit better. And it's also a rock and roll drink, I think. Okay, let's just stir this until it's nice and chilly, but that doesn't matter too much. I mean, you want some dilution in there, because otherwise with all those liqueurs it can get a little bit kind of sticky and rich and all the rest of it. I think that's good enough. We're going to strain this into a rocks glass that I've already put, it's a square ice cube in there. Those big ones you can make. I don't get mine super clear. You've got to go through a whole technique to make it clear. To me, it doesn't really taste any different, but it's nice if it is clear. Anyway, we are just going to strain this drink into there. It's a little cloudy because of that syrup in there, and also maybe oh, it smells amazingly rich and delicious though. And we only really want a couple of garnishes. I think a nice thick twist of orange. Sometimes you do want to, you know, express that oil out. I actually like it in the drink because I think it looks quite nice. And I am also going to put in a maraschino cherry, because really, why wouldn't you? It's got to go the full 9 yards, right? And so let's just put one of those in there as well. That is an amazing looking drink. Let's see what we've got. Well, that's medicinal, but yes, that is rock and roll. Cheers.